What if some of the most famous facts you learned about history were never actually facts? What if Napoleon wasn't really extremely short? What if Vikings never wore those famous horned helmets? What if the people who built the Egyptian pyramids weren't slaves? And what if Christopher Columbus didn't prove that the earth was round? History is filled with stories that sound true because we've heard them so many times. But sometimes, the truth is completely different. Today we're exposing 10 historical facts you probably still believe. Let's start with one of the most famous historical myths of all, Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most famous military commanders. But there's something else he's famous for, being extremely short. The image is so powerful that we even have a phrase for it, the Napoleon complex. But here's the problem. Napoleon wasn't actually unusually short. French measurements were different from British measurements, creating confusion when his height was converted. Napoleon was approximately 5 feet 6 to 5 feet 7 inches tall. For his time, that was around average. So why do we imagine him as tiny? Part of the answer is propaganda. British political cartoonists repeatedly portrayed Napoleon as a small, ridiculous figure. The image stuck. Eventually, the caricature became more famous than the real man. But Napoleon isn't the only historical figure transformed by popular imagination. Imagine a Viking, a giant warrior, long beard, battle axe, and, of course, 2 enormous horns sticking from his helmet. There's just one problem. Real Vikings probably didn't look like that. Archaeologists have discovered Viking Age helmets, but the famous horn design isn't what they found. So where did the horns come from? The image became popular centuries after the Viking Age. During the 19th century, artists and costume designers began adding horns to Viking helmets. Why? Because they looked dramatic. Theaters loved them, artists loved them, and eventually Hollywood loved them. The horned helmet became so iconic that today it feels ancient. But the truth? It's largely a modern invention. And one of the biggest myths about the past has nothing to do with Vikings at all. Medieval people thought Earth was flat. You've probably heard this story. People in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. Then Christopher Columbus came along and proved them wrong. It sounds great, but it's not true. Ancient Greek scholars had already argued that Earth was spherical centuries before Columbus. Eratosthenes even estimated Earth's circumference more than 2,000 years ago. And medieval scholars continued to understand the Earth as a sphere. So what was Columbus actually trying to prove? Not that Earth was round. His argument was about distance. Columbus dramatically underestimated the size of the Earth. He believed Asia could be reached by sailing west, and that's where his calculations went wrong. If the Americas hadn't been in the way, the journey could have ended very differently. But Columbus wasn't the only historical figure surrounded by a famous quote that probably never happened. Let them eat cake. Few historical quotes are more famous. The words are usually attributed to Marie Antoinette. The story goes that the queen was told the French people had no bread. Her response? Let them eat cake. It's the perfect symbol of an out-of-touch monarchy. But there's a problem. There is no reliable evidence that Marie Antoinette ever said it. Versions of the story existed before she became associated with the quote. The phrase appeared in the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but he didn't identify the speaker as Marie Antoinette. Over time, the quote became attached to her. Why? Because it fit the image of a wealthy queen disconnected from ordinary people. A perfect story, just not necessarily a true one. And sometimes, history exaggerates not just words, but violence itself. Gladiators always fought to the death. Hollywood has taught us to imagine Roman gladiator fights as simple death matches. Two warriors enter. One falls, one dies. But the real Roman arena was more complicated. Gladiators were expensive. They needed training, food, medical treatment, years of preparation. Killing every fighter would have been economically foolish. Yes, gladiatorial combat was brutal. And yes, people died. But not every fight ended with a corpse. Some defeated gladiators survived. Others became famous. Some even gained wealth and freedom. The arena wasn't simply a place where Rome sent people to die. It was also a massive entertainment industry. And speaking of massive projects built through human labor, slaves built the pyramids. For generations, we've seen the same image. Thousands of slaves, whips cracking, huge stones dragged across the desert, and above them, the pyramids. But archaeology has revealed a much more complicated story. Workers' settlements have been discovered near the pyramids. Evidence suggests that many workers were organized laborers. They were fed. They lived in communities. They worked as part of a huge national construction project. This doesn't mean ancient Egypt was a society without slavery. Slavery existed. But the idea that the pyramids were simply built by masses of chained slaves is not supported by the evidence. The real achievement may be even more impressive, because constructing the pyramids required extraordinary organization, engineering, transportation, food supplies, architecture, and thousands of workers working toward one enormous goal. And if the pyramid builders were more organized than we imagine, perhaps the entire medieval world was too. The Middle Ages are often described with one phrase: the Dark Ages. 1,000 years of ignorance, no science, no progress, no education. But reality was far more complicated. Universities emerged. Cathedrals pushed engineering to incredible heights. Scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and ancient texts. Knowledge traveled across cultures. The medieval world had wars, disease, poverty, and terrible violence. But it also produced remarkable achievements. Calling the entire era dark ignores centuries of innovation. The Middle Ages weren't simply the period between ancient civilization and the modern world. They were part of the process that created the modern world. But there is one medieval myth that is even darker. Millions of witches were burned, witch hunts, torture, executions, burning bodies. The story has become almost legendary, but one claim is especially misleading. Millions of witches were killed. The historical evidence doesn't support that number. Historians generally estimate that tens of thousands of people were executed for witchcraft in Europe, a horrifying number, but nowhere near the millions sometimes claimed. And another myth? That everyone accused of witchcraft was burned. Execution methods varied by region. In England, hanging was common. In parts of continental Europe, burning was used. Even the famous Salem witch trials didn't involve burning people at the stake. The truth is terrible enough. History doesn't need exaggeration to shock us. And sometimes, one simple myth can completely change how we remember a genius. Albert Einstein, one of the greatest scientific minds in history. But you've probably heard that he failed mathematics at school. It's an inspiring story, the struggling student who eventually became a genius, except it's misleading. Einstein was actually highly capable in mathematics from a young age. He disliked certain aspects of traditional education. But failing mathematics wasn't the story. By his teenage years, Einstein had already developed an impressive understanding of advanced mathematics. So why did the myth survive? Because it's a perfect motivational story. It tells struggling students, don't worry, even Einstein failed math. There's just one problem. Einstein didn't. And that brings us back to the man who supposedly proved the earth was round, Christopher Columbus. For generations, we've been told that he sailed west to prove the earth was round. But that's not what happened. The educated world already knew Earth was spherical. Columbus was trying to find a faster route to Asia. His mistake wasn't believing the Earth was round. His mistake was believing the Earth was much smaller than it really was. His calculations dramatically underestimated the distance between Europe and Asia, and that mistake nearly turned his expedition into a disaster. Then something completely unexpected happened. He encountered the Americas, a continent that Europeans of his world did not know was there. Columbus believed he had reached parts of Asia. He never fully understood the geographical significance of what he had encountered. So the man who supposedly proved the earth was round was actually operating with a dangerously inaccurate estimate of the Earth's size. So why do these myths survive? Because they're simple, they're memorable, and most importantly, they're good stories. A tiny Napoleon, a horned Viking, a flat Earth, a cruel queen saying, "Let them eat cake," gladiators fighting to the death, slaves building pyramids, millions of witches being burned, Einstein failing math, Columbus proving the earth was round. These stories are easy to remember, but history is rarely simple. The truth usually contains contradictions, complications, missing evidence, and uncomfortable details. That's what makes real history so fascinating. History isn't just about remembering what happened. It's about questioning what we think happened. Because sometimes the story passed down through generations isn't the truth. It's a simplified version, a political version, a dramatic version, or simply a story that sounded better than reality. And that's why history must constantly be investigated. New documents are discovered. Archaeological evidence changes old theories. Historians challenge assumptions, and sometimes a single discovery can completely rewrite what we thought we knew. So the next time someone tells you a historical fact, don't immediately believe it. Ask, where did this story come from? Because sometimes the most fascinating history begins when the myth ends. Which of these historical myths surprised you the most? Was it Napoleon's height, the Viking helmets, the pyramids, or Einstein's supposed failure in mathematics? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy uncovering the truth behind history's greatest myths, subscribe to the channel. Because history isn't always what we were taught. Sometimes the truth is even stranger.